Just an instrumental, not anything that like.
Welcome, everyone. This is episode 2 of Curious Success. My name is Rasheem Palmer. I'm working with Simba Hughes,
Hey.
Noriko, and John. And together, we pretty much put together this platform because we wanted to expand on the dialogue on various different life topics. And we wanted to bring a new audience into the mix. And no one's claiming to be experts. We just pretty much giving our opinions and speaking to, what wisdom we have attained throughout the years. Nonetheless, before I get started introducing our guests, I just want to share a brief quote that I feel like represents what we are doing here. And it says, "A sense of curiosity is nature's original school of education." And that's by Smiley Blanton. All right, so our esteemed guests, which I would like to say, we have M. Petizon.
Hello.
And D. Grant.
Hey, how's it going?
So pretty much we're going to, the topic we're discussing today is problem with authority. And I'm going to be asking these gentlemen some questions, which myself and Simba and Noriko, if she wants to, will weigh in on the conversation. And we just, going to get it flow from there. So, gentlemen, first question is...
Well, could we maybe just agree on what the definition of authority is?
Okay.
Level
Absolutely.
set?
Let's
That's
go,
definitely
yeah.
a good place to start.
So let's start with that.
All right, so I actually had to look this up
Mm-hmm.
'cause I was unsure of it, but for what the dictionary describes as authority, it's the power or right to give orders, make decisions, and enforce obedience. A person or organization having power or control in a particular, typically political or administrative sphere. That is kind of authority. The second part of the dictionary, they defined an authority problem. They said it's a conflict in which a person struggles in how to cope with an individual or organization that claims control over an aspect of their life. Because I think that's important because we're going to touch on that today.
Yes, we are.
All right. So now, first question is today's issues with authority.
What do you guys think? What are today's issues with authority?
Well, to start off, I think the main issue at any time when we're dealing with authority, someone who has power over another person, is going to be anytime there's an abuse of that power. Anytime that someone is taking that authority that they've been granted, maybe given to by a group of people, like let's say, for example, in government, and they're taking that for granted and abusing that power and going ahead and manipulating people or taking things away from them that they did not grant the power of.
So agreed. I mean, I think it's a broad question, right? You could look at, as was mentioned, there's issues with authority from a government view. I can say from an employer-employee point of view, even from a parent-child point of view. You can find lots of issues, within that. But I think, as was just mentioned, it comes down to the perception that sometimes maybe someone is abusing the power that they're in for their own benefit. And that's what I think we're here today to talk about.
Okay. Thanks, Michael. Or M. Petizon.
Mm-hmm.
D. Grant has more bass in his voice. Just laughed. That's D. Grant. But do you want to weigh in on this, Simba?
No, I agree with Dave and with Mike, really. I think what they're saying makes sense, and I really want to get into other questions and see what they come up with. I think we have a great podcast here, so I really want to see what answers they have to the questions. I agree with everything they said, so let's get into it.
You got something you want to add, David?
Just one more thing. I feel like authority is two things. There's two definite situations in which you can have authority. One in which people are giving up power and putting someone in power because they're an expert or they're the person to go to in that situation, or in which it's enforced by some other kind of power or factor where people don't have a choice.
Okay. All right. Second question is, are issues with authority a race issue? Why or why not?
So I'm going to say no.
I agree with that.
I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that, again, so context matters for all of these answers, right? When I look at, so I am an authority figure only in work because I actually have responsibility over a team of people. And, for how we are organized and structured, my authority is derived from I control kind of what they do and ultimately what they're paid, right? When I build a team, I don't think of, someone because of their race can do a job or not. But sometimes if an individual on my team disagrees with me and has an authority problem, race can play in and cause tensions there. So if someone thinks that I am treating them differently because of their gender or because of their ethnicity, that's when race can impact my authority, but it's not what I am making my authoritative decisions about.
Okay. Thanks, Michael.
I agree and disagree at the same time. The reason being, mostly I agree because mostly is not going to be an issue that is involved because that is not power in that particular dynamic. That's not something that people are taking away from you or giving. Race isn't that thing. But if we look at history of the United States, we can also say that it is an issue to a degree because of things like Jim Crow laws when they existed and a variety of other laws that restrict people's ability during those times. So to a degree, yes, but it's also, once again, contextual, as Michael said. Yep. Very, very contextual. It depends on those situations. If those situations are nice and even, then no, it doesn't play a factor at all. So it all depends.
So let's talk about maybe a couple situations, right? So government. Do you think that race plays, or is authority a race issue when it deals with things along the government? So you mentioned Jim Crow laws, right?
Yeah.
That was a case where I think the answer is yes.
Most definitely.
Okay. Let's talk about maybe employers, employees. Do you think that race plays into authority decisions there?
When it comes to the law that the government is trying its best to put into play, they try and create as best as possible an equal and level playing field. Okay. But there's so many factors you can't really account for individually. Okay. But for the most part, level playing field, or at least it attempts to be.
So agreed. I think it does come into play though in the workplace when, if I don't, so it's not so much authority, but it's respect, right? So again, I have authority in my job and I can tell people what to do. But the reality is some people might not like that. They might not like my direction, and they could, make an authority issue a race issue easily by saying I made a decision because different backgrounds, different genders.
I feel like, as Rasheem speaking, in terms of government, I feel like the authority issues were racial, and are probably like gender specific as well when you think about just how most of the presidents were being selected. The fact is, okay, we had Obama break ground, but when you think about it, the president could have been someone that was dark skinned in terms of African American male. Did that person have to be light skinned? Because that's the thing that leads to issues. Most people, when they deal with dark-skinned people in terms of black, African-American background, they assume that person might be aggressive, might have an attitude. They seem imposing or can intimidate them. And I'm not saying that person, like Obama, is not like imposing or intimidating. He probably can be to some people, but it's a sense where as you just think about that in terms of this direction that they were going with that. Like, would it have been a dark-skinned black president?
Can I ask this question? So I'll say this. I'll come out and say this. I quote unquote, I'm African American, and I guess I would be considered light skinned in certain circles, right? So I want to ask. I want to ask you. I want to ask the panel really. Are you saying that I'm more safe? And you guys can answer this. Am I more safe because because of my complexion?
And I think
that's what you're saying.
In so many words, yes. You are closer to the shade that's recognizable.
I disagree with that. So you're saying that excuse me, you're saying that perception exists?
Oh, that perception definitely exists. It definitely exists. And it's just pretty much what it is. And honestly speaking, you're a little too dark. Because he's very light skinned. So
You can say something, Dave?
Yeah, to weigh in on this real quick. If you go and look at the media in our society and how it's structured, what people are represented consistently in our media, from men, women, people of African American backgrounds, Latino backgrounds, etc. Most times when you have criminal elements represented, oftentimes it's usually a dark-skinned black man. That's reality. So a lot of people who do not investigate further, and this is most people in the world in general, a lot of people will not investigate further. They will accept things for what they are, how they're presented to them. So oftentimes they'll see these portrayals and then go outside and they'll often get scared or assume all kinds of things that they saw on television when that's not the case. I remember when I went to college, and one of the first questions I was asked by one of my white colleagues, students, fellow students, was, "Oh, have you ever seen anybody get killed around your way or on your block? That must be crazy living where you live. You must be seeing murders all the time."
Let me ask you this. Do you think he would have asked me the same question?
I believe it was...
That's what you guys are, from what you guys are saying. You guys are saying no.
To a degree. I think about it like this, in two ways. It was contextual in the sense that I'm from New York and I'm also from the Bronx, but I'm also a dark-skinned African-American male.
Okay, let me ask you this then. Because
I would say he would ask you that.
Let me. So you're saying so? Because I don't really believe in that, but I would say, let me ask you this: same situation, we dressed up in the same clothes, right? We both speak, pretty articulate, clearly, right? So no slang, right?
Absolutely.
Same type of clothing, exactly the same thing. You think someone of a different ethnicity who's not African American would tend to go in your direction? Someone who's a, I guess, quote unquote, a dark skinned African American, and say, hey, you're the person who's more likely to be a criminal or do certain criminal activity?
Absolutely. It's
like
happened to me in public. I'll give you a perfect example.
I really want to hear Mike's perspective on this.
So to be honest, I'm listening, and it's I don't know if I think it's a little off topic of an issue with authority versus a stereotype of an individual and what they may or may not do in public, right?
But my point to that, when it came to politics, and it was more could possibly just be more in terms of presidential candidates and those presidents of past and so forth, and how it was like that process was just, that's what I was speaking to, where in terms of how race comes into play with those authority figures. So that was the point of me bringing that up, just saying how the selection process is. Like, there has yet to be a woman president as well.
So I think you got to also recognize, though, that it's not as black and white in that. There's issues of style that come in here too, right?
Say that again.
And part of, so again, if we look over history and the dynamic that you talked about as to why there was not a president of any other ethnicity besides Caucasian or other gender than male, right?
Yeah.
It was, it's not because the U.S. was racist, right? The U.S. over that period became more diverse. There were larger influx of immigrants and immigrant populations growing. Part of it was because of just style that they were comfortable with. So it's easier to choose what you know versus what you don't know. So in a lot of authority problems, again, my context, a lot of my examples will be from the workplace because that's what I deal with day in and day out. It's not so much, someone is disagreeing with me because they have a problem with my authority where it comes from. They're disagreeing with me because of a stylistic difference in how I am maybe delivering a message or conducting my business. So you just have to be aware of that as well.
Okay. You got something you want to add, David?
I feel as if because you come from a particular background, there are automatic assumptions about what kind of expertise or authority you can bring to a particular topic, group, etc.
Agreed.
From a cultural point of view. So I think that's more so what you're speaking towards. Would this person be able to be a capable leader or a capable authority in this position because of that background?
Yeah.
So I think people often consider these things when, not necessarily out loud, but when they're dealing with situations like that. And I think that question that you asked, yeah, there's a lot there, but that's still like a whole other thing. It would have to, we'd have
definitely
to
is.
break
That's
that
a
down
pretty
into a whole,
complex issue, yeah, so.
we'd have to break that down into a whole lot of sub issues.
So
And I like my light skinned brothers. Just let you know that, brother. You cool with me? You cool with me? All right.
It's good to know.
The third question is, where do you think the issues with authority stem from?
David?
Go ahead, Dave.
So, authority, as I was talking about before, is when you either willingly or unwillingly give up power to someone, an entity, whether it be a company, whether it be a person, or whatever else. And when you do that, to a degree, you're giving up any kind of autonomy with regards to whatever this situation is, whether it be the plumber who's going to come fix your pipes or whatever it is, or whether it be a police officer who's supposed to, serve and protect. So you're giving up a bit of your power. So some of those issues to me stem from the fact that you're giving up this power. You're giving faith to this person or this organization that they're going to help you and they're going to come through for you and guide you in the right place and guide you in the right direction, so to speak, with regards to whatever the situation is. And that's always a little scary.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's, again, a very broad question. So it's the classic, it depends. But in the context that we're talking about, it really comes down to, I'm giving up something and don't like what the person is telling me. So it's just it's a mismatch in expectations, right? Of to what I expect from the individual and then what they're giving me in return.
Yeah, I definitely want to weigh in on this because when I think about it, I think it kind of like falls along the lines of one having issues with rules. And it's just like, rules are meant for us to have order, have organization and some, in various different ways. But I feel when someone has issues with following rules, that can lead to a lot of issues that they may have with authority or someone that's authority figure. And it's kind of interesting because, it could be, perceived that is a behavior issue that the person has. And that's the reason why they have an issue with, following the rules. It could be within a school setting, outside a school setting, or, it depends on the environment. But I just feel like it's, one of the things that I feel like at least a lot of the issues is one not willing to follow the rules.
So, agreed. And I think part of that is driven by behavior, though, right? So if you look at, there's formal rules and there's informal rules. So there's formal rules like laws, right? So if I have a problem with authority and I break a law, that's not good, right? I think the majority of people would say, I understand why an action was taken against that individual, right? They broke a law. Then there's also informal things, right? So like just social norms, right? And you'll find that
make up culture.
Big things that make up culture. So this is a very general statement, but so dress codes at school, right? This is a simple this is a simple thing where I'm going to like act against authority. So the authority here is the school, and they say I have to wear, blue pants, white shirt every day. It's just school uniform, right? But what happens every day? Someone doesn't come in a blue pants, white shirt, right? They come in maybe blue pants, white shirt, but they cut the legs off the pants, right, to make them shorts, right? So I would say that that's a behavioral issue that is acting against the authority, right? Or that's what stems from it. But I think it's not as black and white that, I have a behavior issue, I act out, I defy authority. It's, you have to consider situation matters. Why is that person acting out? What is at it? Because sometimes that's a good thing, right? So if you look at, we talked about authority from a government perspective, employee perspective, and just kind of, individual family relations. So governments can be corrupt, so people acting out, that's a good thing, drives change, right? Employer, well, maybe not. Sometimes people just don't like getting direction from other people. It happens, you see it all the times with men and women. A lot of men struggle with female bosses, and they act out because they just simply don't like being what they think is being told what to do by a woman.
Yeah,
right?
Correct. So you're saying there's various different.
Yeah, it's I mean, this is a tough subject to simplify because there's a lot to it, as we've talked about, and you almost need to pick a context to say, is this kind of formal authority, so like laws, right? So the government is the authority there, or is it like, something informal like workplace authority and more social type things?
True.
It's informal authority, right?
Yeah,
and when
definitely.
I think I could throw out two like specific ones though. With authority and issues with authority, it's restriction of freedom. So I feel like a lot of issues with authority tend to come from restriction of that freedom. Where in our society we have supposed freedom, and I say that with the quotation fingers. You're supposed to be able to do whatever you want at any given time, and be able to face the consequences of those actions upon yourself and your environment. But we don't really have true freedom in that right because there are so many rules and laws and things that govern all those things. So that's one way in which someone may have an issue with authority, and that, I guess, to a degree comes back to those behavioral issues, partially. But it's also because we don't really have true freedom in reality. The other thing I'll touch on is that some issues with authority stem from culture. So you have a lot of cultures that may not mesh necessarily with some of the things that go on in particular countries, that may go on in particular societies. And those things that one group of people do may be illegal or outlawed by the majority group. So because of that, that minority group or smaller group will end up with all kinds of issues and trouble with the law or whatever the case may be.
You want to add something to that, Simba?
I think they covered it. It's such a big topic, and Mike and Dave did a great job. They covered, a pretty big scope of where issues stem from, with authority. I think it's part of it is the behavioral issues. It's sometimes is the culture, as Dave said and Mike said, in the behavioral issues, and where one side of it is I guess acting out and not following, I guess, the formal rules or the informal, and then sometimes it's actually with the government or even I guess, and we're gonna get into that with the next question as far as certain authority figures or certain systems where they may misuse the authority, right? They may, do certain things that they're not supposed to do, and as a result of that, people have issues with authority, right? And I think that's a great segue going into our next question, right?
Well, that's a good segue. So, why are police the most disliked authority figure? Do you guys agree or disagree with that? What are your thoughts?
So they're certainly not popular
At the moment.
Definitely not at the moment.
And I would say a lot of that becomes there's a belief out there and that they overstep their bounds of what they're actually empowered to do.
A misuse of them.
And I think simple examples could be if I'm maybe making noise on the sidewalk. I have the right to make noise on the sidewalk, and there's no laws unless there's a ordinance in New York City that says I can't yell and scream, right? That's preventing me from doing it. But yet, if I was hooting and hollering walking down the sidewalk, I bet you that regardless of my race, a police officer would probably say, stop, right? So I would say, why? I'm not harming anybody, no one's complaining, but yet he felt the need to use his power, right, his authority that he feels that he is granted from the city of New York to stop me. And, simple example, really basic, but you can take that to lots of other things as to why, they are disliked because they probably more than not do more than what they are actually charged to do and allowed to do.
Okay. Well, when I look at this question, I think I agree with you, but at the same time, I also think it depends on who you ask, because people who are, let's say, more wealthy or in better off situations aren't going to deal with the police as often, and then other people in smaller communities that tend to be policed a lot more, just judging by random statistics, if you look at a bunch of different things, they tend to be in smaller, poorer communities more often. So depending on who you ask, you're going to get a whole lot of different answers. And I wouldn't say I necessarily consider them the most disliked authority figure, because for me personally, from my personal experience, I've never really been stopped and harassed by the cops, which I've been blessed to not have to deal with and not have one of those stories where, something crazy happened to me. But it really depends on who you ask. People who are going to be more affluent, more wealthy, I find, are less likely to have to deal with things that the police come across with. So, for example, I don't know if you guys remember this case from a while back. There was a young man who was about 15, 16 years old, was driving a car, ran over a person, and ended up in an accident. A couple of his friends actually died. And the ruling ended up being that he could not serve time because he had what's called affluenza, which is being too wealthy to comprehend the consequences of his actions, which made no sense whatsoever to me. It was ridiculous. So in that sense, the authority figures, this stuff at all the rules, the laws, nothing applied to him because, consequences mean nothing to me because I have all this money. And his subsequent taking of life was written off as something that was an everyday, regular thing that he would never be able to comprehend simply because he had money. Now, if you flip that and you look at lesser affluent communities, oftentimes they are more often policed and more severely policed. So it really depends on who you ask and what the situation is.
I think to answer your question, I think it's more apt to say who's the most disliked authority figure. Like, why are they currently? I think from a social standpoint, the police officers are definitely not popular right now, right? Because of what's going on across the across the country, across the news, dealing with these different some of the deaths of these individuals. But I get what you're saying, Dave, but well, to answer your question, firstly, I think it's. Let me get into that.
Take
first.
your time.
I think it's. It goes back to what we mentioned and what Mike was saying, right? It's just a misuse, and they have the authority, right? They have, they protect and serve, and they kind of overstep their boundaries, really. And a lot of times people have issues with that. I think, to me, as Dave said, I've never been pulled over or stopped, by police officers, right? So I don't have any personal experiences to mention here, but I think right now they would be probably one of the most disliked authority figures just because of what social climate was going on right now. But going to what you mentioned, Dave, as far as people being affluent, do you think it's something that as a result of that, so like, I guess, quote unquote, if someone got into trouble, broke the law, who maybe came from a wealthy background, you're saying that justice probably wasn't served, and therefore the outcry from the community is that, authority. Hold on for 1 second, guys.
Go ahead, sir.
All right. And you're saying that authority or justice wasn't served, and as a result, certain community people from certain communities come out and say, hey, we don't like such and such, we don't like the cops, we don't like, is this something where you're saying as a result of, if that happens, that creates people to dislike the police officers more? Like, when those situations happen, as opposed to, and also, I guess, if people in, poorer communities were to, break the law, and, I guess, maybe they're targeted more from what you're saying. This is the statistics. You're saying that those communities also will voice their opinions. They're saying it goes hand in hand. Like, so when people from that community see wealthy people get off, we just like the police, and when they're being targeted more by the police in their communities, that they're also going to be like, hey, we don't like this, and this is why we hate, or this is why we don't like the police officers.
This did me like Marvel versus Capcom. Hit me with like a 20-hit combo right there. That's a lot.
Sorry about that.
It's all good. I'm going to try my best to address each of your points with one kind of collective response. So let's put yourself in the shoes of the people who are being policed consistently and think about it in that context. You are a person who's going around your neighborhood, minding your own business, and consistently, day after day after day, these guys come up to you and stop you, interrupt your day, interrupt you going about your life, you going about what is supposed to be your freedom, your autonomy, your ability to govern yourself and do what you want to do on a day-to-day basis which is harming nobody. Now, on the flip side of things, let's say you go visit your friend. You're in an affluent neighborhood. You get stopped again. But this guy is with you and nothing happens to him. When he's alone or when he's in his neighborhood, and put yourself in the shoes of this person, none of this stuff happens. If you look at roughly the statistics for these things, African American individuals are usually about 4 times more likely to be stopped and searched, sometimes without just cause. If you look at white communities and other communities like that, which granted are usually not going to be big inner cities and things like that, it's a little bit tougher for the police forces to police all the people because it's a smaller neighborhood and there's not as many police. They get stopped less, just overall, in this city as well as in others, and also are more likely to actually buy, sell, or use drugs and have them on their person at any given time. So just based on those statistics, from a policing point of view, that makes no sense because you're not actually stopping anything. You're just harassing a person who is less likely to actually be part of the problem. Just touching on the whole war on drugs thing, but that's a whole separate topic. So in this regards, you could look at these people and go, well, why are you harassing me every day when I'm doing nothing? So they're unjustly being harassed on a daily basis. Eventually you're gonna be like, well, why aren't you bothering this guy? Why am I being picked on? Why am I being bullied?
All right, so I think we've established that police are at least in the context of people in this room, they are up there with being a disliked authority figure. And I think it was mentioned before. This is an it depends answer. You could say the government is a very disliked authority figure.
Absolutely.
You can even say that Derek Fisher of the New York Knicks is a disliked authority figure because he's running an offense that doesn't fit the team.
Dare you to do no wrong, people.
But from just social context, I know that's what you wanted to talk about, kind of police as the authority figure. Let's stick with them as the example here.
Well, going back to that and speaking to what I was talking about before and representations in the media of race and various other things, this is the first time on such a huge scale that our society, and I say our society not just meaning this country, the United States, I say our society meaning the entire world, has been so linked and so transparent in such a way in which we can see the everyday lives of so many people so quickly. In an instant, we can get these peeks into how someone's life works, what they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So I think part of it now, at least coming from a context of outside this room and what I've seen utilizing social media such as Facebook, Twitter, different websites that people have created to get these messages out there. This is the first time ever that we've ever seen all these different things come collectively at us. And on a consistent basis, people going, hey, look what this person did to me. Hey, look what this person did to me. And it's multiple situations. It's not like these things weren't happening before, but it's the first time we've been forced to be subjected to them on such a wide scale from so many different angles. And people can't avoid it or write it off now because there's so much evidence of it happening. Not necessarily saying that there are a ton of bad cops. I know there are plenty of good ones. Lots of my friends are cops. But this is the first time it's been approached in this way.
I don't know about you now. I'm messing with you. I have friends that are police officers as well. Let's go into the next question. Of recent events, how was authority misplaced with, the recent police shootings and incidents that occurred with Eric Garner, Mike Brown, and Ike Gurley? Background, of course, Eric Garner was the gentleman who was choked, put in a chokehold, and pretty much could not breathe. I'm not sure if he had like chronic asthma or something like that, but police officer pretty much choked him to death. And Mike Brown was shot by a police officer who apparently said that he was coming to attack him in the process, I guess, of arresting him. And Aki Gurley, excuse me, was a gentleman who got just shot in a dark staircase and walked up on a police officer who accidentally shot and killed him. So
I'm going to take a very unpopular opinion here. I'm going to say that authority was not misplaced in any of these cases. That it was actually, again, as an officer of the law, their authority, right, is to enforce the law. Okay.
Yep.
In the first situation with Eric Garner, there was a violation of the law, and I think it came down to an issue of someone was very poorly trained in dealing with the situation, and it escalated. Okay.
Can I ask you,
Sure.
May I ask, what was his offense? What law did he break? I can't.
He was illegally selling cigarettes.
Okay.
From my understanding, actually, from speaking to one of the people who was a member of that community, who's a friend of Eric Garner, he said that's actually not what happened, and many other people also speak to this. If you go to social media and you check out people's responses to the situation, my understanding of the events is this. There is a school up the block from the location that you see in the video where he was stopped. He went up to the school because he was told that some kind of fight was going on. He went to break up that fight between some youths, then walked back down to the place that he usually is at, normally selling loose cigarettes. He had just gotten back there, and if you listen to actually the commentary in the video, one of the young men who's videotaping it, or maybe it is the person who's videotaping it, or maybe someone off to the side, says, "Wow, they're going to arrest him for breaking up a fight?" Now, in this situation, I feel as if, and I understand how you feel, as if him doing what he was doing is an arrestable offense after such repeated behavior. But if you look up the law on the loose cigarette law, all the context of it, there's nothing in there about arresting anybody. It's a citation-worthy
Sure,
offense.
it's a finable offense. So that's why I'm saying it's a training issue, is that there was a situation where an ordinance was broken, right? It's not you go to jail because you break this, you get a ticket, right?
Absolutely.
Words were exchanged. The words were misinterpreted on both sides, where someone felt threatened, and as a result of feeling threatened, he felt the need to take action. So very poor training, right? Same with the Mike Brown situation. There was a series of events that allegedly had happened, right? But fundamentally, someone didn't abuse their authority. They just overreacted to a situation. The officer described the events that he was being attacked, right? Mm-hmm. Mike Brown's supporter said that was actually not the case, right? So again, it's not so much that it's an issue of authority, right? It was that someone, struggled or someone misinterpreted someone's actions, and then, again, poor training, right? Shot him, right? Discharged his weapon. Same with the gentleman in the stairwell, right? This wasn't an issue of somebody breaking the law or perceived to be breaking the law. It sounds like someone panicked and their gun went off. And unfortunately, someone died as a result. But from an authority perspective, right, he had the right to patrol a stairwell. He was just not prepared for what, was going to happen in the stairwell.
Yeah, sadly. In the case of Eric Garner and in the case of Akai Gurley, I can see where poor training plays a factor and a variety of other things. But in the case of Mike Brown, I'm not so sure. There's so many extenuating circumstances there that make me call into question whether or not it's a case of poor training and overreaction, simply because the more and more I research on the subject, the more and more I find that there are very, very nagging questions there. So, for example, the police officer, Darren Wilson, his prosecutor, and this has been pointed out by quite a few people, did not do a thorough cross-examination of the men. That's one. The second thing is that his prosecutor was also the head of a charity that raised about $500,000 for him. So to me, just from that, I don't think he should have been involved in that case. There's also the involvement of them giving incorrect information to the jurors about the law in which the officer was allowed to pursue and or discharge his firearm in that situation. Normally, in an open area, in a public area, you're not supposed to do that in the majority of places, unless it really calls for it. In that situation, someone's running away from you, you're in a car. There's just a lot of simple logic things that just make absolutely no sense here. So to me, in that case, authority was absolutely overstepped. In the case of Akai Gurley, not so much. Somebody got scared. Horrible training. Horrible training. Eric Garner, kind of debatable.
What do y'all feel about the recent synagogue shooting with the gentleman who stabbed, I believe it was a Jewish young man in his head with a knife? And then when police tried to arrest him, he came at the police with the knife, and then they shot and killed him.
Well, I don't have any background on that, so on that incident. But what I'll say is, just from what you mentioned, if I was a cop and someone rushed me, and I guess you're trained to just say stop and pull out your weapon, stop and raise your hand, put down a knife and something like that. And if you rush them, then from what you're saying, and if a cop was to shoot him, I think that's proper training. Just from that, so obviously, just from what you just mentioned, right?
To kill.
I don't have any background information. If he's rushing you with a knife and you say your commands, right? Whether you say, hey, put your hands up, put your weapon down. You say what you need to do, and you have multiple. So I don't think it was one. I'm assuming it wasn't one officer there, right? And
allow me to interject real quick.
Sure.
So there's actually been video of this floating around Facebook floating around other types of social media.
Sure.
So me personally, just the real quick answer to the question, I feel as if this was handled properly.
Yeah.
If you look at the video, the officer's clearly giving directives for the guy to put the knife down.
Okay, great.
The other members of the synagogue are trying to talk the guy down, and he's just not having it. And he's just bouncing around with his knife, not like in a crazy manner, but he's just moving around, and they're asking him continually, I need you to put that knife down. I need you to put that knife down. We can talk when you put that knife down. We can have this conversation. We can do all of this when you put that knife down. And this goes on for a few minutes, which I was shocked and surprised by. So
I bring this up because what was said was that the gentleman clearly had mental health issues. Now, there was a recent incident, I'm not exactly sure when this took place, but it was a former MMA fighter. He was drunk, he was at a bar or whatever the case, and he ended up getting in a fight with police. He headbutted one in his chest and apparently injured his back, one of the police officers, and he was fighting with them the whole time. The process of them arresting that man led to him being tased, not shot, not killed, and he was beating police up. So I think, I brought that up because I feel like there's still just kind of like piggybacking off what Mike said, it boils down to their training.
So it also comes.
A lot of their training is like, if you telling me this person, you're gonna just automatically shoot to kill the person. You couldn't shoot to wound the person in a situation like that, or you could not tase the person to get the knife out of their hands. You couldn't utilize that.
But let's make a distinction here. So authority was not misplaced in that they, as police officers, their duty is to uphold the law. So in each of the circumstances, there was allegedly, right, something that they thought was a justification to have an encounter, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and in each of these cases, the encounter led to something awful.
Yeah.
What you're getting at now is that, as part of a police officer's authority, it is the right to use force, okay?
Yeah.
It's in each of these situations, too much force was used, right? And it led to an outcome that was not a positive outcome. What you're getting at, Rasheem, is also along abuse of authority in that, do I always have to use force to solve a conflict, or are there other ways, right? And we, in these three instances, it sounds like there was a better outcome, potentially, without the use of force.
Most definitely. Another thing I think, just to touch on this real quick, is that it depends on what you have as an available tool to actually deal with this person. Because at times, not every officer, depending on where you're at, your location, what kind of funds that town has, that city has, not every officer is going to have a gun, not every officer is going to have a taser. I believe in the case of Mike Brown, Darren Wilson that day had opted not to carry a taser. That may not always be an option for the officer. They may not have that resource available. In the case of the guy with the knife, he already had his gun out. To try and switch over to a taser would be a problem. Also, they're trained to shoot center of mass. That's where you're most likely going to get a hit. It's also most likely where you're going to do the most damage, but you have to neutralize this threat, especially if someone's coming at you with a knife.
Let me. Obviously, this question is not on the list, but let me ask you guys this question. First off, is that Kai Gurley African American?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. let me ask you guys this, and let me see what you guys think about this. Like, so we all agree that they weren't trained properly. They definitely could have. And I guess the main thing is people died as a result of this, right? When we can all agree that maybe they didn't have to.
Well, I wouldn't say they weren't trained properly. It could just be certain training techniques that they may not just have used that they could have possibly used.
Okay.
Could be one of those type of situations.
Let me ask you this, and I heard someone mention this, and I want to see what you guys think about this, right? Like, so for the Eric Gardner case, like, okay, what they said, in the news, okay, he was selling cigarettes, right? From what out of watching the video that they have online, I don't think he deserved to die over that offense, right? Yes, obviously, I guess he, in his eyes, okay, that's what he felt he needed to do to, calm the situation, but I don't think he deserved to die over that offense. I want to ask you guys this. Do you think, for example, like a lot of times, even with the Mike Brown, and I guess even going back with the Trayvon Martin case, a lot of times, do you think it's simply a matter of if we were to get cops, right, like you make sure in certain areas you just have cops who know the environment or know the area. Like, to be frank, and correct me if I'm wrong, if the cop Darren Wilson, he's a white cop. And I know I'm going to bring in racist, but Darren Wilson, he's a white cop. Eric Gardner, I believe, was a white cop as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a white cop, yeah.
Akai Gurley, was he a white cop?
He was Asian.
Hey, let me ask you guys this. If you were to, example, say partner, because you obviously know officers, they don't just go alone, they always have partners, right? And you just get someone from that area, would that help? Would that nullify? So someone, for example, a cop who knows that area could be like, you know what? Hey, we got him, he's restrained, or in the Michael Brown case, a lot of times you see a lot of cops in certain neighborhoods, right? Who, when they see, a lot of times they know they were part of the community, so they know some of these actual people in the neighborhood. So, for example, someone like Mike Brown, I believe he stole something from a store before he encountered Darren Wilson. If it was a cop, not necessarily a black cop, but just a cop who knows the environment, knows the culture, could have been like, hey man, what you doing? Calm down with that. Hey, it's all right, Darren Wilson. There's no need for that excessive force because he. So
I think the answer is yes, because I'm more apt to listen to somebody who has credibility with me. Right?
Absolutely.
And credibility can come from because we are members of the same race, so ethnicity, credibility. It can also come from knowledge, right? And that
absolutely.
I've seen them around, I know who they are.
Culture, yeah.
I know if they're confronting me, there's a good reason why, right? I've
Yeah.
probably done something wrong. So,
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting thing that I know there's been a lot of articles with the New York police and that, it's statistics are almost reverse, where the number of police officers that patrol, poorer neighborhoods are not representative of the population of the neighborhood.
There we go.
Right? And so that's a credibility issue where, of course, if I approach someone that doesn't know me, doesn't understand me, and I clearly don't understand them and don't know them, there's going to be a gap in our ability to come to a mutually,
Mutually agreeable situation.
mutually acceptable resolution, right?
Yes.
Because I have no credibility with the person, so why, outside of the fact that I have a badge potentially, right? Why would they listen to me?
Absolutely. To go back to what Simba was saying and extrapolate on that topic a little bit more, there's a couple of reasons why they don't do that to a degree. Way back when they used to have people from that community come into play. But also you have to consider that if that person is from that community, they may get harassed on a daily basis from whoever is the crime authority in that local neighborhood. So that could also be a problem for that person in terms of their safety and also their family's safety.
Well, they don't necessarily have to, and I guess they may not even need to come from that community, but just need to understand, that background.
Absolutely.
So let's say,
and I don't disagree with you on that at all.
Let's say if a cop is patrolling in I guess one of the, quote unquote, in an urban area, right? An area that supposedly has a lot of crime or whatever like that. And he wasn't raised in that neighborhood, but he grew up around that. So he knows he or she knows what goes on in that neighborhood, right? They know how to communicate with an individual from that neighborhood, right? Just like if someone who's not from for example, didn't grow up in an affluent background, didn't grow up in, I guess, a quote-unquote privileged life, and you go to those neighborhoods, you may not know how to communicate with certain individuals. It's not anything. I don't think it's a race thing in that. I think I'm not from that culture. I'm not from. I don't know. I can't relate to you on certain things because I never grew up like that, right? So it doesn't have to be like, you go into African American neighborhood, poverty-stricken neighborhood, you need African Americans to partner with the other races. No, it's just something where, at least I'm suggesting, where if they just can relate to what goes on, maybe someone who partnered with the cops that were encountered the Eric Gardners and the Mike Brown, maybe they could have prevented the deaths of these individuals, right? Because the people died, right? And I think maybe that's they don't have to be. Just because we go into an African American neighborhood doesn't mean I need to have an African American cop to be patrolling there, but just someone who can relate, right? Because there's going to be a gap. Forget authority. There's going to be a gap because I didn't grow up there. I can't relate to certain people there, right? You're on the street.
I get what you're
speaking
saying.
to people, right?
So there's two things with that. Like I said, it's a potential risk in terms of the person's life and their family's life. Just like with Batman, Spider-Man, they said, "Oh, I don't want to reveal my identity because the people close to me are going to get hurt."
Yeah, but what I'm saying is you don't have to. No, what I'm saying is you don't have to be a part of that community.
Oh no, absolutely, and I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I'm just saying there's a potential risk there. Now, in addition to that, to take that a step further and being able to actually relate to that community, you have to have some kind of PR. You also have to have some kind of outreach, which I'm not so sure, but my knowledge is limited in this. I'm not so sure that the police are actually doing. I know this used to be something they did in the past, where they did outreach, they did communication with the local youth, the people who were in the community, and just talk to them and just say, "Hey, how are you doing today? What's going on with you? What's going on in this neighborhood?" They would know the people there.
It's still something that they have as a system in place. I know they did it for my program that I work at, and they came in and spoke with the staff and touched base with the staff, or just pretty much asked their perception on how things were going on within the community and so forth. So it's definitely done. But I'm sure, like, based on what they're saying now, is that they are going to be looking at trainings or further trainings for the police officers. And, I would say, based on how recent years and how I've seen, like, police officers that, took on a job, they have been mixing it up in terms where it's like a person that might have grew up in like maybe a more impoverished community or whatever the case, or can relate. They have been mixing it up. How far, I don't know. I think sometimes is when it comes to police force, it's like it's just such a drastic culture difference, and they set their own rules amongst themselves on how they're gonna. Sometimes it can feel like it maybe be blurred perception, of like it's us against the world. Don't know though. But let's go into the next question, which is are there authority figures that can be considered illegitimate? Why or why not?
I got a counter question to that. What is an illegitimate authority figure? Because the only time I can consider somebody to be an illegitimate authority figure is if they took their authority by force. Other than that, my other authority figure is government, police. These are people that are appointed. So they've been given this. So they can't, by the nature of that, be illegitimate. So the only time, like I said, it could be the people who are using force or some other kind of duress in order to influence this.
You agree, Mike?
I do. I think it is the best example is of an illegitimate authority figure is a government that wasn't put in power by the people, right? They just said, I'm going to do this, right? Another example of an illegitimate authority figure is someone that used their power for personal gain, right? And it was obvious that it was personal gain. So you've seen that with people who were elected, but then used their access, their knowledge to steal, right? Lots of government officials have stolen, taken bribes, right, for personal gain. So
insider trading.
There you go. Someone had access to information. So it happens all the time.
Okay. The next question I want to ask is, if someone has a problem with authority, does that mean that they have mental health issues?
Quick answer, no.
Not necessarily. We already touched on this a couple of times. It could be a cultural thing. It could be that the person, behavioral problem, yes, also. Not necessarily mental health. Simply because of, I mentioned this earlier, I think your natural instinct when someone is trying to enforce something on you that is not necessarily within your range of freedom, your autonomy, your natural instinct is going to be like, why? Why should I do this? Why am I giving my power up to this person? In Robert Greene's book, I believe it's called The 48 Laws of Power, one of the first rules is to never give up your power. You should never, ever do that unless you absolutely have to. Unless you're in a situation where you don't have any other choice, which to me is situations when the police come up and ask me questions and feel a legitimate need to stop me and I have to obey the law. Those are the only times when I have to comply to something that is already established by society to be law, and there's just common knowledge that do this. Whereas in other situations, it's probably the lesser that the person's going to have a mental health issue and just go, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to go run down the street naked for no apparent reason.
You got anything you want to add to that, Mike?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think the answer is no.
Yep.
I mean,
Quick
you know,
answer.
so you can even just look at simple examples of parents and their kids. It's a generational thing, right? So,
Generation gap, definitely.
you know, parents have the right to, if their child is in their house, they have the right to give orders and enforce rules. It's the power that they get for putting a roof over their head. And
Yep.
you see it in everyone's life. You know, I
So-
disagree with my parents all the time.
So when, say for example, you have like a child and they seem to not be able to follow the rules, and then the parents like, we got to go to counseling, and then your child has ADHD and all types of diagnoses are made on the child. Is like, now the child has mental health issues, or what's going on? It's like, do they not have mental health issues?
So I think further testing would determine if they legitimately had any issues. I think it's too tough to say.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of a gray area there, but
They said Einstein had a problem with rules.
that's kind of a gray area. But I'll say this: I feel as
authority.
if, from my personal experience, a lot of the times where I did not want to comply with something was because I had a lack of understanding as to how it would affect not only myself but everybody else, and my development when I was younger. Being older and having the knowledge I have now, I'm much more likely to ask, why is this going to affect somebody else? Why is this going to damage somebody else? And why or why not should I do this? Versus just going no. Because I have to take into consideration that I live in a society with other people and that my actions have consequences not only for me but for others.
Okay.
It's also, again, think of I'm going to use a generational example. So, you know, parents, grandparents, they grew up at a time when the social norm was you just agree with someone that's older than you. They have more experience, right?
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
Gen X, Gen Y, as David kind of highlighted, it's the what's in it for me generation. So you always ask why, because you're trying to figure out quickly, what do I get out of this? But they don't all have mental health issues, and they're not all, you know, breaking authority. They're just trying to get an understanding to, you know, what is the situation.
Curious.
Exactly.
Is having an issue with authority a bad thing? Why or why not?
Quick answer, no, at least for me. The reason being is because I think you should always question authority and the motives behind it, because it may not always be a positive thing. So going back to our previous, yeah, absolutely, it's not necessarily going to be for your best interest. So going back to the previous example cited, a corrupt government, a corrupt individual who's doing things for themselves to try and gain advantages for themselves, whether that be in government or whether that be in some company getting insider trading tips and various other things. So I feel as if you should always question people's motives and question why they're going to be doing things, because just regardless of authority, everybody lies. Period.
Okay. I'm not going to ask what makes one an authority, because I feel like we covered that and what makes one an authority. But the next question is, how do you approach being an authority figure? So this is more in terms of yourself, you know, within a work environment, could be outside of a work environment. How do you approach that?
So carefully, right? I think is
Absolutely.
the answer. I mean, I think, you know, we've talked a lot about context matters in a lot of these kind of situations, and style matters. And, you know, I am only an authority figure at my job in that through my title and through my role in the organization, I do actually have the power to tell people what to do, right? And I have the power to determine what they should be paid, right? Within guidelines, right? But with that power, you have to use it to make sure people understand why I have it. And if they understand why I have it, then, you know, I need them to to agree that I should have it, right? So it's tough.
Dave?
Heavy is the head of he who wears the crown. In my job, it's a similar thing. I have to deal with people every day who are asking for help. So they're automatically coming to me giving up power. And that's always an uncomfortable feeling. So I often have to consider how I would feel in their shoes. But I guess I don't approach authority in the same way. I'm more willing to give up that power in order to get the information or the item, tool, whatever it is that I need. So I try to approach it with a measure of consideration for how the other person is going to feel. Because oftentimes when you're asking for something or when you're lost, you're coming from a place where you don't have any power and you're trying to gain some footing and trying to understand what's going on around you. So you really have to be careful with regards to people's feelings, even though when you're in authority, you should kind of disregard, to a degree, your own feelings. So you kind of have to be objective and also very careful about the emotions of others because of how it could play a factor into how they're going to behave moving forward with you, as well as how your interactions will go.
Okay.
And along those lines, you also have to think about consistency.
Absolutely.
And that same situation, two different people, you have to react in the same manner. Otherwise, you won't be respected as an authority figure.
Absolutely.
So how do y'all react to people who challenge your authority? You don't have the answers, Mike.
Oh man, that's a good one because it really depends on the situation for me. Quite often I will have an irate client who will come in and tell me that something I'm doing is wrong or something I'm doing is disrespectful to them. I try and meet it with kindness as best as possible and try to resolve whatever issue it is. So a lot of people will be upset with me because they feel as if they're not getting what they need, but the reality is there's certain rules that I have to work within when I'm at my job. And I'm limited by those rules. I can't just give everybody the keys to the city and go, hey, just do whatever you want. Woohoo, have fun. I can't do that. It wouldn't be fair. Then anybody would do anything and we'd end up with a lot of damaged equipment and nobody else would be able to use it later on. So I try to meet people with kindness so that they can kind of bring whatever irateness they have down, just like basic customer service kind of things. And I also try to help them to understand why or why not I cannot give them something they may be asking for or give them an understanding of why that rule exists, how it may possibly cause harm to other people in the future or cause harm to themselves.
You want to weigh in on that?
No, I agree. It's this is also an it depends answer where but you always want to understand the why the action is taking place, and then you adjust your response based on the individual circumstance and then the why.
Okay. You want to add something to that, Simba?
No, I think they're on the money. I think they're they hit the nail on the head with their points. I just want to ask, with Dave, you mentioned you try to be as kind as possible.
Yeah.
I'm assuming not a lot of people try to take advantage of that, like in the sense of if you're telling them how to do certain things, and you're trying to, a lot of people, they may see that, okay, you're being kind, you have a certain demeanor when you're telling them what to do. Do they challenge you as a result of that more? Like say, I don't know, I don't know what you do.
All right, so allow me to give some context to yourself and also to our listeners. So I'm an instructor for the Research Foundation for the State University of New York. I teach people how to utilize computers, utilize different types of software, put together computers or whatever else they need technology-wise. So I run a computer lab. On a day-to-day basis, people may come in and ask to get online, to get on the internet, to check their email, or how to form a presentation. So yeah, on occasion I do have people who will try to milk me for whatever they can in terms of getting some homework done that they need to get done. But that's where that kindness has to end, because then in the long term of it, that's not me truly being kind if I'm doing somebody's work because they're not learning anything. if they don't learn anything and they don't learn how to do it themselves, I look at it like this. In the long run, you're not going to be a functional entity going out into the world when you leave this room. Because subsequently, if this happens again, what are you going to do if I'm not here? So I look at things from a point of view of long term. What am I going to do for this person, kindness-wise and just authority-wise, all this stuff, that's going to help them long term, that's going to allow them to be able to be a functional human being in society, regardless of where they are.
Next question. Can authority can an authority figure be objective? Excuse me.
I would go with yes. I think at least what you try to do. Excuse me. Sorry. You try to be as objective as possible. You try to be. I'm not sure if you can be, but I think from what David was mentioning, Mike was mentioning, you try to be as objective as possible when making decisions. You try to be as consistent as possible, right? It doesn't matter the gender or the race. You just you have a certain they're talking about the job, so they try to do it within their parameters of their jobs, right? Within certain guidelines, and just try to. I'm sure certain situations there's going to be a little bit different and maybe a little bit new even, right? Because you make rules based on what and what has happened in the past, but a lot of things it may be the first time it has happened, right? So you just try to be as objective, especially from a job perspective. Just try to follow the guidelines, the parameters that you have, I guess the powers that the authority that you have, and you try to be as objective as possible when dealing with your employees or the people that you have an authority over, right? So
you guys want to add to that?
No, I agree. I mean, it's objective within the set of guidelines that.
Yeah, because you can never be completely objective. You're going to have your blind spots. That there are things you don't know. There are known knowns and known unknowns, to quote Samuel L. Jackson. There's only certain things that you can figure for within whatever it is you're doing, and then there's going to be other things that you just will never take into account because they don't happen to you. Unless you're a robot, you can never really truly be objective. There's always going to be some kind of level of emotion. So, yeah, yes and no, but it's also contextual depending on the situation.
All right. How can a person advocate for themselves when interacting with authorities?
Facts. Lay out the facts. Don't make it emotion-based.
Absolutely. Objective facts are always the best way to go. When I'm dealing with my clients coming from an authority point of view, I try my best when they're upset to strictly stick to objective facts that can only be applied to that situation, that do not come from a place of emotion. I also have to try and restrain myself from acting on emotion, as well as dealing with any of my emotions at the moment. I deal with them and try to process them later.
What about in a situation where you are dealing with police?
So facts.
Same exact thing. You can't dispute facts.
I think when you're dealing with those in those situations, you try to be again as logical as possible, right? You're not trying to go into it with emotion, and I think for the most part, when you go into situations like that, there's a greater chance of you getting your point across, right? Whether it be police officers, as you mentioned, or whether it be if you're an authority figure in your job, or just dealing with people in general. I think with certain decisions, coming into it with a logical perspective, a lot of times I think a lot of people can relate to that, and they understand it more as a result, as opposed to being emotional.
So there's also a stylistic thing at play, right? It's that so you have to want to have a mutually beneficial outcome as well.
Absolutely.
Sometimes people are standoffish. They do not, right? So it's not only being as fact-based as possible to take emotion out of it, but it's to present yourself in a way that you are, whether it's your body language, your tone, your words, that you are trying to work with them to agree on something.
Absolutely.
Okay. Is there a difference between being an authority and being a leader?
Yes.
Absolutely. I was just thinking about this, and I came up with a funny example in my head. You can be a leader. You can be the person who's, like, let's say, the captain of a troop for the army or whatever the case may be. And in that case, you're a leader and an authority at the same time. You have the experience. You have the status that designates you as that. But on the flip side of things, you can also have an authority such as someone who works at, let's say, the post office or McDonald's. That person has authority over you getting to whatever thing you're trying to get to. So in the case of McDonald's, you have the person who's at the sales register. Thank you.
Sure.
And they're an authority over you getting your food, but they're not necessarily a leader. So if they tell you, hey, you're going to have to go do this in order to get your food, you're going to have to, do some jumping jacks or whatever the case may be. You don't necessarily have to do all those things.
Yeah, I'll even give a simpler distinction is that an authority, has been given the right to govern, basically. A leader has not. He's choosing to do it, and he has something about him that people are choosing to follow.
Okay.
So think about the protests that are happening now, right? No one has formally said, you must do this, right? There are people that feel passionate about certain things, and they are deciding to lead a set of like-minded people, right, who also believe in similar things.
Okay.
But someone who is an authority figure can also be a good leader. So it can be one and the same, but from where they got their power from and their right to govern is different.
All right. Our last question. Is being an authority in our current society necessary?
So I think authorities are necessary. Otherwise, people, it would literally be chaos, but, authority does help. If we didn't have government as an authority, would we have, good healthcare programs, schools, would towns have their garbage cleaned up? Because could we get people to agree that these were the, 5 things that every, government needed to provide locally? I don't know if we could get to that.
Probably not.
So they are helpful.
They're
helpful. I will not go as far as necessary, but they are helpful.
If you're a libertarian, you would probably say no to this question, but I feel as if authority in the sense of government and other established figures are necessary so that we can establish order out of the chaos. Just like you were saying, if we don't have these things, it's just absolute chaos. And even though a lot of people can and do have the ability to govern themselves, some other people don't, and they become risk factors for the rest of society. That's reality.
Yeah, going, piggybacking off what Dave said, I do think libertarians probably say no, but I think they're necessary. I think as a society, I think we're generally in a logical society, right? There are tons of things we do that don't make sense, that's not right, that's out of the order, that's that thing that's kind of like leans on the, the chaos side, the chaotic side. So they are necessary to me, right? I think we need authority. I think we need authority figures, whether people like it or not. I think obviously you don't want them to misuse, the power to govern, their power. But I think in general, I think they are necessary. That's my personal opinion.
Okay.
I think
I'm not judging you. Well, so before I close out, do you guys have any final words or thoughts on this topic that you want to share?
It's a large, multifaceted topic. You really have to, with this, get a little bit more specific, I think, when it comes to some of these situations and look at it from multiple angles. When it comes to authority with different situations, there are not only the issues you have to look at in terms of the established rules, but you have to also step outside the box and look at things that you may not have thought of. Once again, going to those known knowns and known unknowns and unknown unknowns, things that you may not have even considered. And with that, you have to communicate with people. I feel like a lot of the situations with regards to recently with the I guess for lack of better words, poorly trained officers. A lot of these situations could have been resolved just by having more discussion and doing it in a calm manner and finding out a little bit more information as to what was going on maybe with some of these people that were upset.
Well, I think that's why, and that's why I mentioned it. That's why I guess I proposed it. That's why I think maybe some of the officers needed to be more relatable to the actual people, the victims, right? Because you can say what you want and have a discussion with someone. If you can't relate, a lot of times, if I can't relate to you, I'm not sure if we're ever going to come to a common ground a lot of times. Right?
Absolutely.
So I think that's why I mentioned you need to be, the officers maybe need to be more relatable to the actually individuals. And we're all talking about, African American individuals, right, in certain areas, right, and let's not sugarcoat it, right. That's what we're talking about, right, and there's a reason there's a protest because some people feel it was unjust, and some people feel, and I just want to make sure to say this. I think all cops, it's just some of the cops are, I guess maybe poorly trained or maybe in a sense bad, but I think police officers do a great job on a regular, right. If there's an incident, I'm going to call up, the cops. I don't, black or white, I'm going to call them, right. So I think. I just want to get that out there, but I think going back to Dave's point, it's just if they're more relatable. Because I think it could have been prevented, but I think sometimes having those discussions, you need to be able to relate to the actual people, right? To the quote unquote the citizens or the people in those neighborhoods, or else you're never going to come to a common ground, right? If I speak with someone who I guess it's from maybe a hood in Brooklyn or a certain urban area in Brooklyn, I may not even I'm an African American male, right? I may not be able to relate with him because I never grew up like that. So certain things, even if I'm coming from a positive standpoint, we still may not be able to agree. And I'm African American, right? So I think a lot of people try to make this into a black and white thing. I just think it's just there's some poorly trained officers, and we just got to make it. Not just saying, okay, and obviously this goes into protest, but like injustice for all. But I think we just try to make it, we just want cops to do a better job, period, black or white.
Yeah.
Right?
I think race is just a sub-narrative of this entire story. We want to have good cops on the streets. We want to be able to, as Dave said, these could have been prevented. And I think overall, you just want good cops.
Any final words from you, Mike?
A few, and no different than what's already been said. That I think we've agreed that authority is necessary, and it does do more good than bad. That issues with authority stems from multitude of factors. Tough to single out a single one, as each circumstance is unique. But that people need to be aware that context matters when dealing with authorities. That sometimes just because we are from different backgrounds, whether that is in gender or ethnic background, I'm already going to disagree with you, right? Potentially, just because of our context that we were. But, when we're trying to resolve this, right, it is take emotion out of it, fact-based as possible, and have a mindset that you want to come to some kind of mutually agreeable solution.
A middle ground.
A middle ground. Or at least be aware that, authorities were granted power to uphold rules in most cases, right? Just because you don't like the rule doesn't mean that they don't have the right to enforce it. Correct. So it's to respect the authority as well.
Just try to comply.
And it's mutual respect in most cases. If it's given, then you'll find that, people will understand why they are being told something that they don't want to hear. Correct. Or an action is taken that they might not agree with.
Okay. Well, this is Curious Success. I feel like, we are just looking to learn universally more about our world. And we're going to continue to be coming up with topics like this and just, expand on the dialogue, ask others, bring up other subject matters that we feel would be good to just touch base on. So, no one's claiming to be experts. We just speaking to our wisdom and our level of experience in dealing with life, period. I definitely just want to make sure, that everyone's aware that we do have a website, CuriousSuccess.com, as well as we have a Facebook page, iTunes, and
SoundCloud.
And what happened to YouTube? Are we still good with YouTube?
You got to talk to John about that.
Yeah, we're going to have to talk to John, who's not present today, but we'll look into that. But nonetheless, we're definitely going to continue to keep bringing topics like this to the wider group of people, and just hope y'all can join in the conversation and add to our dialogue.
And before we close, I just love to like to congratulate Dave for coming on board and Mike for coming on board and speaking about these topics. Maybe some of them. I don't know, may have been uncomfortable for you guys, but I'm glad that we all, came to the table and discussed, one of these topics. And I hope we can, in the future, we can bring you guys back and talk about many more topics for Curious Success.
Appreciate that. Happy to participate.
Echo what Mike says. Thank you very much for having me.
Great job, guys.
Thank you.